Welcome to Self-Hacked Radio, where cutting-edge science meets cutting-edge health. Hello everybody, I'm here with Ben Greenfield, who is the writer at bengreenfieldfitness.com, a site that gets over 250,000 viewers a month. He is the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Beyond Training, and was voted number 1 out of the top 100 most influential individuals in health and fitness. He has a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Idaho in sports science and exercise physiology. He's got certifications in personal training and strength conditioning and sports nutrition, and he has over 11 years of experience in coaching people in improving their performance and helping them achieve their goals. Now, the first question is, I'm actually just curious, what do you like so much about being an athlete? Is it the enjoyment or the health aspects of it?
Well, being an athlete, well, it's definitely not the health aspects, dude. That crap is not healthy.
Right, that's where the question came from, because it seems like you like to do a lot of exercise. And I was just thinking, like, okay, is this part of his philosophy about how to be optimally healthy, or it's just he just loves it so much, even though he thinks it's not optimally healthy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So first of all, I should frame this with the fact that I'm walking right now on my treadmill while we're podcasting, and I don't really consider that exercise as just like low-level physical movement, the same as our ancestors might have done while, hunting or gathering or gardening during the day. That's not my job, right? Like, I'm podcasting and writing and stuff like that. So, whether I'm standing on my little mat, my anti-fatigue mat next to my desk, or whether I'm walking on my treadmill, I don't consider what I'm doing right now to be exercise. Now, once we start to talk about things like, hill sprints and weighted vests and hammering on a bicycle down the highway, or, doing wads and carrying sandbags and stuff like that, yeah, I mean, that's exercise. It creates inflammation. It's a stressor, especially on the sympathetic nervous system. However, it is also necessary as preparation for either A, the throes of competition, or B, doing things like hunting, providing, fighting, being prepared to be, I think it was Commander Mark Devine of SEALFIT who I first heard use this term, being prepared to be a sheepdog, right? Being prepared to protect and provide at the drop of a hat. So, a big part of exercise for me is simply the fact that I've always been hardwired to be a warrior, right? Like, I've always had like this kind of like bloodthirsty drive to compete, to go out and fight, to go to battle, to conquer, whether it be nature and the elements, or to conquer other people on the field of sport. That simply makes me very, very happy. It allows me to inspire other people. I will certainly admit there's probably a little bit of a psychological component there too, right? Like, just wanting to get out and step away from, the technology and the writing and the computer, to just go experience nature and competition on a very, very deep and interactive level. Ultimately, though, I would love to do all those things and not run on a treadmill or, train on a bicycle or carry sandbags around. But the fact is, you simply can't be prepared to compete at a very high level, or even to do something like, say, pack 150 pounds of elk out of a hunt without actually preparing and training for those activities. So in someone who just wants to, let's say, live a long time, right? You got to move, you got to lift a little bit here and there, whether it be building a rock wall or doing some deadlifts. And you do have to sprint every now and again, whether that be, running from a lion or chasing down an animal, or simulating that by doing a series of short 100-yard sprints, once or twice a week. But ultimately, from an exercise and a movement standpoint, assuming that you have hacked your environment so that you're engaged in low-level physical activity throughout the day, that's all you really need to live a long time and to be healthy. Once you start to get into structured durability and stamina and volume mixed with aerobic and anaerobic activity. All of that is purely for the sake of sports specificity and preparing for actual athletics, or in some cases, like I mentioned, hunting or something like that. But ultimately, I do not preach that that is healthy per se, right? That latter form of exercise. But in some cases, it is necessary, and especially if you're competing in sports, it's crucial.
Okay, yeah. So I do things like you mentioned to kind of live longer, like sprints and push-ups here and there, and I build into my day low level activity. But you're saying that you do what you do not to live longer or anything like that, but you're doing it because you just love it. You love the competition, the sport, the spirit of it, getting out in nature, things like that.
Yep, exactly. And some elements of exercise and the type of exercise that I do certainly do lend themselves to living longer, right?
Right.
Like yesterday, I spent almost an hour and a half, chainsawing and chopping wood and hauling
Right.
big logs up from the property. And, that it beats you up a little bit, but you're stopping and drinking water and taking rests. And it's not like you're neck and neck with some other, competitor running at 85% intensity down the
Right.
hot highway, beating up your body and exercising to glycogen depletion. Instead, it's provision based exercise that research has shown that that type of multi joint functional exercise that is done with a purpose actually increases testosterone and increases growth hormone, and can help you to live longer. So there are a lot of it depends in this discussion.
Nice. And yeah, so I was actually curious. Do you think you mentioned in your podcast you've historically and maybe currently had to deal with higher cortisol levels? The obvious explanation would be the level of exercise. Do you think that have you ever tried like exercising less and seeing what happens to your cortisol?
Sure. Yeah, my cortisol is pretty low right now. Honestly, since
Okay.
I quit doing much in terms of like ultra endurance sports,
Mm,
like Ironman triathlon training, for example, it's dropped quite a bit since I have a lot more time to recover. I have the luxury of being able to program in more rest days, etc.
mm,
Now, I've never actually, since I started self quantifying, completely stopped exercise, or at least brought exercise and the type of exercise that I do down to a level that I would program for ultimate health and longevity, and
mm-hmm.
then tracked cortisol levels. And that's primarily because, part of my job is also to be towing the starting line of races and stuff like that. And I don't have the luxury of taking like, whatever, 4 weeks off to not run, not bike, not lift, not really do anything that stresses my body, because the amount of fitness that I'd lose from something like that would really inhibit me from doing part of what really like pays the bills for me. So
I hear what you're saying. So yeah, because I get like I'm getting like a lot of people now who are telling me they have high cortisol, or I see they have high cortisol, and they want to know how they can compete even better and work even harder. And I'm thinking like your cortisol is already high. Like, what do you? The easiest way to bring that down is just to exercise less. But so
no, not
yeah,
necessarily. I mean, I brought mine down by also focusing on sleep, relationships, meditation, journaling, yoga. I mean, there's a lot of other things you can do. There are even nutrients,
of
like
course, yeah.
philodendron and magnolia and adaptogenic herbs, and limiting EMF and Wi-Fi exposure. So I mean, like, there are a lot of things other than exercise or
Of
limiting
course.
exercise that can affect cortisol, of course. And I think you know that, of course.
Yeah, but a lot of these people are doing that already. They're trying to bring their stress levels down through a bunch of means, and maybe they're not doing enough, obviously. But if your cortisol levels are high and you're like doing you're doing the things that you mentioned, then you have to start thinking about again. But I hear what you're saying. It's part of people. It's part of what you really enjoy about life. So
Mm-hmm.
so
Yep.
it's a trade off. Now, let's talk about blood testing a little. What do you like to test periodically and sporadically? What are like the main things you like to track?
I don't do a lot of sporadic testing unless I have a concern pop up. Like, There was one point a couple of years ago where I was getting cold really frequently and noticing like my nails were not quite as healthy as I would have expected, and so I got like a complete thyroid panel separate from a complete blood count or a metabolic panel or anything else. So I tested T3 and T4 and reverse
Mm-hmm.
T3 and thyroid antibodies because I suspected that there were issues. I've done that with a cortisol and DHEA salivary measurement before to delve into how stressed out my adrenals were. What else have I done? I've done a one-off like iron and ferritin test
Mm-hmm.
when I suspected symptoms of anemia. So I'll do little things off, but really for me it's just a basic quarterly blood panel. And now I'm doing a really really full blood panel called the longevity panel. It's exactly what I have over at greenfieldfitnesssystems.com, where it's hormones like testosterone and DHEA and cortisol and all the estrogens. It's heavy metals. It's liver, kidney, thyroid, inflammation, cholesterols and lipid panel, vitamins, minerals, and electrolytes. Pretty much everything really. And then I also do a yearly gut panel, just like a 3-day stool panel, look for parasites, yeast, fungus, stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
pretty comprehensive on a quarterly basis.
So on every quarter you test for heavy metals and stuff.
I do now, yeah.
You do, and have you found that there was ever abnormalities with that, or?
Absolutely, yeah. I've had to install things like manganese filters. I've done copper detoxes. I've found a lot of little issues that I got to go after when it comes to metals.
Oh, so you test all
Even
the
though
metals, not
like
just heavy metals.
my water, for example, is it's well water, and you would expect well water to be like super pristine stuff, but even that has issues. And I have a pretty significant iron and manganese filtration system set up because those are two issues in my well water, for example.
Mm-hmm. So, what are your ideal numbers for, let's say, let's start with some basics like heart rate, resting heart rate. What do you think is ideal for if somebody just
Uh,
wants to be healthy?
yeah, there is no ideal number that I really look for. Most of the athletes that I work with are definitely below 60. For me, ideal is below 45. That indicates that I've got pretty good fitness, pretty high cardiac stroke volume. Lower is not better necessarily, though. A lot of people will pursue that lower number, and you'll get to a certain point where you kind of top off as far as your stroke volume is concerned. And once your heart rate significantly drops lower than that, like let's say one week all of a sudden it's much, much lower, that can actually be indicative of overtraining or overreaching or adrenal fatigue once heart rate gets too low.
Mm-hmm.
So you do want to make sure that it's not just like get it lower at all costs versus get a consistently low heart rate, but then once it kind of tops out, a big dip after that can be a red flag. So most of the athletes that I work with range from 40 up to 50, and then general population 50 up to 60. I don't see a lot of healthy people with a resting heart rate above 60.
Okay, so you think it's the ideal is if you're not like a big athlete between 50 and 60.
Yeah, but it totally depends. Like, right, if you're a small person with a small stroke volume, you're going to have to pump more times per minute to deliver blood to
Mm-hmm.
tissue. So it does depend on your body size and stuff like that too. It's like elephants have really low heart rates, mice have really high heart rates. So it does depend a little bit on your body size too.
Right. Okay, that's great. So testosterone and estradiol, you probably know, right?
Yeah, estradiol a little less than testosterone, but testosterone ranges. I've got some people who do just fine as far as libido, motivation, stuff like that, ranging from 300 to 400. Other people feel like crap and feel like they have clinically diagnosed hypogonadism unless they're up above 500. I generally don't see anybody who feels crappy once they get above 700.
Mm-hmm.
When I was competing in Ironman triathlon, my numbers were mid 300s. Now they're mid 600s.
Oh wow.
I definitely notice a difference. It's not like I notice double the difference in terms of libido, motivation, etc. But for total T, that's about kind of general ranges. Estrogens, dude, it really varies. It can be from the 10s up to the 50s. I personally find that once I'm above 40, that's generally indicative of a lot of aromatase activity going on. So I use an aromatase inhibitor on and off throughout the year.
If you had a client and they wanted to be healthy, if you found their estrogen over 30, would that be something that you would try to get down, or you would say don't worry about it if you got no symptoms?
Well, it depends, right? It depends what total T is at and whether or not there's an indication that like the Leydig cells in the testes aren't producing much testosterone versus high total testosterone and low free T, in which case, there's probably some over aromatization or conversion of total testosterone into estrogens going on, or potentially even like high sex hormone binding globulin due to hypercortisolism. So it really depends on why it is that total testosterone or that testosterone is low. Whether it's free or total T, or and what's causing the high estrogen levels.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You
also have to look at environment too, right? Like phytoestrogen sources in the environment.
That's true. Yes, you definitely the testosterone and estradiol ratios matter, and so does your sex hormone binding globulin. So yeah, that's obviously very important. Going back to the testosterone, what would you at what point would you say we have to bring it up, or would you say it depends on the symptoms of somebody else or their estrogen, things like that? Let's say if it would you
totally depends. Like if I talk to somebody and they're 350, they got good libido, good motivation. They've got good free testosterone. They've got controlled levels of cortisol and sex hormone binding globulin. I'm fine with that, So
that's interesting.
It really depends.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Mine is about, it ranges anywhere from 5 to 700. So yeah, but I get most of the people I get are actually below 500. So I was curious what you. And what
do you do? Are you like a nutritionist or?
Well, I just consult with people who have health issues that I've historically had to deal with, and things like brain fog, fatigue.
Right.
And yeah, and they come to me through my site, so I work with them on solving their health issues, and
Gotcha.
One thing that comes up a lot is low testosterone, and so I don't think it's an underlying cause of what their problem is, but I think ideally you'd want it to be above 500. I was curious. You deal with a lot of people. I was curious what you do.
I don't necessarily look for it to be above 500. I always find out what's going on from a lifestyle standpoint. And again, if somebody's libido, motivation, everything is good, I don't necessarily make it a point to try and drive testosterone up if life is good.
How did you drive your own testosterone up?
Primarily through just limiting the amount of very, very high level chronic repetitive motion activity that I did. That was one of the things. I've gained 10 pounds, right, since I quit Ironman triathlon. So I've certainly got a little bit more mass and also just body fat stores to rely on. And I'm also burning through fewer calories each day. I'm doing more heavy lifting too, which is probably helping out with testosterone and growth hormone. Haven't really changed up too much in terms of macronutrient percentages. It's more just overall less calorie restriction or more of a positive calorie balance simply from doing less very, very long periods of time. Swimming, cycling, running, stuff like that. Those are the biggies. As far as sex goes, I have sex at the same amount of frequency as I did before. It's just better sex because the testosterone is a little bit higher. Right. But ultimately, I would say the biggest thing would just be primarily a replacement of a lot of the long, slow aerobic exercise with heavy lifting, and then also just more calories available.
Why does the slow aerobic exercise decrease testosterone? Do you know the mechanism there?
I would suspect two reasons. First, just lower amount of calories, right? When you are exercising at the extent that you got to exercise for something like Ironman triathlon, you just have fewer metabolites available for something like hormonal precursors, right? You get more vitamin D shuttled towards cortisol formation. You get less calories available overall. And so when you look at something like, the corollary to low testosterone or hypogonadism in men, it would be something like the female athletic triad, right? And with the female athletic triad, it's not necessarily carb restriction or fasting or any of those type of things that is the leading cause of that issue in women. It's over exercising and caloric restriction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once you start eating more, exercising less, or both, you tend to see the hormones start to bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Why does
that's
eating more
probably,
cause the hormones to increase? Is that because you're taking in more cholesterol and
you're
increasing
taking in,
pregnenolone?
you have more fats, you have more cholesterols available, you have more calories in general, and I suspect the other reason is that um, when you are training, and particularly when you're training for competitive endurance sports, many of your exercise sessions are not just voluminous, with the same volume as you might get with something like, let's use some like ancestral example, right? Like persistence hunting or, farming or something like that. But they're also intense. And when you combine intensity with high volume, you tend to get a lot of stress and cortisol created. You tend to get high levels of sex hormone binding globulin. And I would suspect it's basically a downregulation in the body's fertility, simply because you're sending your body a message that it is, in battle for long periods of time every day. And, I doubt that nature wants to bring babies into a very, very stressed out scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably part of it as well.
What about let's say these numbers you might not know offhand? What like let's say red blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit? Do you have ranges that you look at for those?
No, I don't have any numbers memorized on that stuff, but I'm trying to drive mine up right now. I'm doing a lot of hypoxic training because my two main competitions right now are at elevation. I'm competing in a train to hunt competition next month in Colorado Springs, and then Spartan World Championships a couple months later in Lake Tahoe. So I've been doing intermittent hypoxic training or continuous hypoxic training at anywhere from 12 to 15,000 feet almost every day now.
Oh wow.
So that's just with a HEPA air filter and a hypoxic air generator.
Mm-hmm. So hypoxia increases erythropoietin, and that increases the red blood cells, the hemoglobin, the hematocrit. Do you have any other tips to increase erythropoietin?
Yeah, there's one interesting study that they did with heat exposure post exercise. 30 minutes of heat exposure post exercise for increasing blood volume and erythropoietin. So that's an interesting mechanism as well. And I've actually built a sauna in my gym that I can sit in after exercise sessions to get some of that passive heat exposure, because that's it makes sense, right? It increases blood volume because blood is necessary for cooling. So that's another way that you could do it. But the trick is
It also
you have to be pretty uncomfortable, right? Like it's hard to go sit in a sauna for 30 minutes when you're already kind of hot and bothered from an exercise session.
Right. I actually think it would do it without an exercise session, even if you did it separately, because heat increases hypoxia-inducible factor, HIF, and that's going to increase erythropoietin. So I think I have seen a few studies on that. So I think even if it's away from the exercise, I think it would still increase it.
I would imagine. Yeah. I would imagine that it would.
Maybe not as much.
It'd be interesting to see the difference in values.
Yeah, I'm doing saunas daily now, so I'm tracking my red blood cells and things like that. I want to see how much it's going to increase it in me. Yeah, and so
the only thing I've really been paying attention to from a quantification perspective, with the hypoxia, has just been blood oxygen saturation, and that one's kind of fun because you can hop onto a treadmill or a bike or whatever prior to your exercise session and use a fingertip pulse oximeter to measure your blood oxygen. And most people, it's 97 to 99, and through the exercise session you can see it drop and drop and drop, and so far I've been able to get it as low as 88, and
oh wow,
that definitely results in post-exercise headache. Like you feel the same way as you'd get with like altitude sickness after something like that, and it disrupts sleep too. Like it takes you an hour or two longer to fall asleep, so it's really interesting. It's one of those stressors that does increase erythropoietin production, but I'm curious how hard it is on the body, and just can't imagine going and living at altitude. And that's one of the issues that they say affects a lot of athletes who will go to altitude, is it just takes so much longer to recover. Your sleep quality isn't quite as good, and so there's a little bit of a catch-22, right? It's like, where does the increase in EPO kind of balance out with the stress that you're under? So I personally think that the whole concept of like living low and training high, like using something like a hypoxic generator, is probably the healthier way to go. Although, like I mentioned, like I'm still feeling the effects of the altitude training and the added stress from that, even in the absence of living at altitude.
Do you ever track like white blood cells and things like that?
Yeah,
Because
I mean
if you have
they're
higher
they're
white blood
on
cells,
they're on like a complete blood count, but again,
do
I
you
don't
look
know the
at
exact
the
numbers off the top
numbers?
of my head.
Mm.
I only
Okay,
pay
fine.
attention to them if they're out of whack. Mine never have been, so I've never really had much of a reason to be concerned about immunity or an underlying infection or something of that nature.
Right. So I look at that sometimes because if it's over like 6, that indicates you actually are increased risk for like heart disease and things like that. Even though the range is actually from like 4 to 11, so they're not looking at
For
optimal.
your total WC count.
Yeah, total white blood cell count.
Yeah.
The reason is because white blood cells are, they're a snapshot of your total immune system, and the way the immune system combats, pathogens is by creating free radicals. So the neutrophils create free radicals, and you can look at your white blood cells and neutrophils, and if they're over, let's say, you start. I think it's over 6 or 6.5. Heart disease starts to go up. But from my angle, I'm just looking at, well, that's an indicator that oxidative stress is also going up. And so people who have higher ranges generally have increased oxidative stress. And my job would be to find out why it's high, try to look at their past levels. Are they having
Yeah,
an infection now?
it's tough with that because I think you also have to look at things like your homocysteine and your HSCRP to give you clues in that regard, because especially if you're looking, because I work with a lot of like CrossFitters and marathoners and triathletes and stuff like that, and a lot of times that type of daily depletion results in white blood cell count suppression. You get immunosuppression, and
Right.
so you can have absence of high white blood cell count, but still presence of inflammation if you look at like CRP and homocysteine and stuff like that.
100%. You want to get as many measures as you can. So, yeah, if the white blood cell count is low and the CRP is high, then that's obviously still going to be a problem.
Yeah.
What about the, do you track or look at the, the numbers for bun creatinine? Dr. Cruz,
Like the bun
you're a fan of
creatinine
Dr.
ratio.
Cruz. Yeah, Dr. Cruz thinks it should be under 7. And I know you're a follower of his blog. Do you track that and try to get it to an ideal range, or that's not
Well,
something you look at?
the issue is, for me personally, it's kind of twofold. A, I use about 5 grams of creatine daily, and so that naturally kind of drives creatinine up a little bit. And B,
You have
I've found
muscle.
that unless you abstain from exercise for about 72 hours prior to a lab, a lot of time the bun to creatinine ratio is kind of out of whack anyways. So usually if I see really, really high blood urea nitrogen values, in most cases, if I ask an athlete about it, they either exercise really hard in the few days leading up to the test, same with creatinine, or they're doing a really crappy job with hydration, right? They're just not drinking enough good, high quality water. So, especially if that number is elevated in the absence of exercise prior to the test, just like, freaking drink more good water.
Exactly. Do you have like a range for that you look at, the BUN, or
Like a number?
yeah.
No, I'm spoiled because most of what I do is like through Wellness FX, and I'll use their labs, and so
Oh, I see.
I
So they
mostly have
have
to
the
look at
graphs and
ranges
things.
rather than hard numbers, and it's kind of like Sherlock Holmes, right? It's like rather than memorizing all these numbers, I'd rather just look at the actual values as I go, and so I don't really commit numbers to memory.
It's
Very
much
very
more.
few of them.
Yeah, I definitely hear
TSH,
you.
total testosterone, CRP. There's a few that I look at as far as actual numbers are concerned that I do have memorized, but there are
What do you?
others that.
What about the CRP? What numbers do you advocate for those?
I like to see it below zero point 0.2, and I think that's
Oh wow.
doable in athletes. A lot of people will say 1 or 0.7 or even 0.5 as a cutoff value, but I've found that in people who are eating like a low inflammation diet, limiting their exposure to EMF and Wi-Fi and microwave and stuff like that, drinking really good high quality water, and basically living a low inflammation life, even me with the amount of exercise that I do, it's very, very rare that I'll be above 0.2.
That's
So,
incredible.
of course, there are, strategies for stuff like that too, like curcumin and fish oil and tart cherry and things of that nature. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, mine actually, my subjective experience definitely agrees with that. In that, when I used to have like more inflammation, I guess it wasn't so systemic that it showed up in the blood test, but it used to be like zero point 0.7, and now it's always below 0.3, sometimes 0.15, 0.2, but
yeah,
it's
and you
much
gotta
lower.
wonder how much genetics plays a role in that as well. As far as like your endogenous antioxidant production, that's a really interesting value you can get now when you export your genetic testing results to a lot of these services like DNA Fit or Athletigen or some of these ones that are created for athletes. They'll tell you like how fast you recover, right? Whether you're a fast recoverer or a slow recoverer, and they're just looking at endogenous production of glutathione and superoxide dismutase. And a lot of people create much, much higher levels of those. And I suspect that contributes quite a bit. For me personally, right, like I rank super duper high there in terms of endogenous glutathione and superoxide dismutase. So that probably allows me to sustain low levels of inflammation, even in the presence of the higher amounts of exercise.
The places that you're talking about, they're looking at the genetics, or they're looking at the blood
Yeah,
values.
they're actually looking at the genetic SNPs responsible for creating those antioxidants, right? So they'll also look at the genetic SNPs associated with like whatever fast twitch versus slow twitch, or even like the genetic SNPs responsible for how much of like a dopamine release you get from exercise. So whether you're a high exercise motivator or a low exercise motivator, right? Like we were talking earlier about how some people like me just are just like hardwired, like we just love to go out and move and compete and stuff like that. And that's another one that I rank really, really high on, like up in the 90s, is
Nice.
motivation to exercise.
Right. I
So
guess we could have figured that one out.
some interesting stuff in genes as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I do a lot of research on the SNPs, 23andMe, those kinds of SNPs, and I do research on the SNPs that are involved in oxidative stress as well. So, yeah, I look at the original research and I dig in. So, I do look at those factors as well. Do you have any like natural ways that you decrease estrogen? Maybe do you use DIM?
Yeah, the diindolylmethane, I eat a crap load of broccoli, and a lot of the cruciferous vegetables have that in it. But I don't personally supplement with that. I don't tend to have high estrogen levels. I've had some women who have like estrogen dominance, right? Like really high estrogen and low progesterone, and they tend to benefit from like a DIM supplementation protocol. Along with things like calcium deglucarate and magnesium to assist with liver metabolism of estrogens and stuff like that. But I've used for myself, just to make sure that I don't get over aromatization when I'm using like testosterone boosting herbs, right? Like fenugreek and tribulus and stuff like that. There's one supplement I use called Aggressive Strength, and it's like an herbal testosterone booster that'll cycle throughout the year. And that one, the same people that make something called estrogen control. That's like aromatase inhibitors. It's not DIM though. I want to say they're using like chrysin or myomin in that. I don't remember the exact ingredients, and then black pepper and turmeric together, which have some effect on estrogens as well. But no, I don't use DIM personally.
My problem actually, my problem with chrysin was I read a study on it that it can cause DNA damage at higher levels, even in the
Which
levels.
one?
Chrysin. That's why I'm a little
Yeah.
concerned about using that one. Obviously, it wasn't like a clinical trial or anything, but it was kind of like could have been in vitro or a mouse study. But yeah, I kind of got scared away from chrysin. What are your top ways for increasing HRV? You're big into that.
For increasing HRV, that nothing beats low stress and sleep. But I had an interesting discussion couple weeks ago with Dr. James Heathers, who does a lot of HRV research, and we talked about breath work and HRV, doing things like during your exercise sessions, focusing on deep rhythmic breathing or even nasal breathing, even during hard workout sessions, right? So even when you're doing like a set of deadlifts, really focusing on breath in, like a nasal breath in, nasal breath out as you're lifting and lowering. Alternate nostril breathing would be another, right? Like breathe in through your left nostril, out through your right, and then vice versa. Box breathing is one as well. I do a lot of box breathing, especially when I'm measuring my heart rate variability in the morning. 4-count in, 4-count hold, 4-count out, 4-count hold. The top two things I'd say that I've seen to affect it most dramatically, aside from what you would expect, right? Just like sleep, low stress, etc. Number one would be sex the night before. That seems to really jack it up in the morning. And then alternate nostril breathing, like I mentioned, like that one, it's a little bit more of like an annoying form of breathing because you got to use your hands. And I like to like journal and write and meditate and stuff while I'm taking my heart rate variability. So the alternate nostril is not quite as useful, but
how long
it does
do you do
work.
it for? The alternate nostril.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
And you find when you're
5
testing your
minutes.
HRV that increases. How long does it take to increase it?
Yeah. Oh, you see a result within like 20 or 30 seconds as far as like the real-time reading on the app. Yeah. There's also the quick coherence technique. I don't know if you've heard of that one. That one's, like the Heart Math Institute has really done the majority of the research on that, where, you take something that you love or that you're grateful for and you picture it and you imagine placing it in your heart and breathe into your heart. That one works pretty well also. Things that I found to dip or lower HRV the most, one would be antihistamines. I took Benadryl once and it dropped it into like the 60s the next day.
Oh, wow.
And I spoke with the folks at Sweetwater, and they do a lot of kind of reading through the HRV research, and they said that's consistent with some of the things they've seen. So antihistamines, I don't know if it's an effect on the vagus nerve or on acetylcholine release, but it's affecting either sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system, and it causes a really big dip in HRV. So don't use antihistamines unless completely necessary, because they F up your nervous system, apparently.
Even if you use it even the night before. Like some people would take it for sleep, like Benadryl, but you're saying that's going to...
Right, and you wake up the next morning and it's super duper low. And part of that might be just disruption of sleep cycles too, right? Because anybody who's taking antihistamine knows usually kind of... You fall asleep, but you kind of toss and turn a little bit. So the other thing would be any type of very, very stressful, like running from a line type of activity, like a back squat or sprinting up a hill or something like that. And if you measure HRV in real time during exercise, you can see that will be the type of thing that dips it the most, that causes the lowest sympathetic nervous system frequency score. But that's that's good information, because like if something during exercise really, really stresses you out, and if it's short and intense, then that technically means that your fitness response is probably going to be the most enhanced from those type of activities. So, it's not necessarily a process of constantly keeping HRV high, as much as looking at what gets it high, what gets it low. And some of those things that do get it low, you can choose to do, right? As like a means of hormesis, right? Like cold thermogenesis would be something else that drives heart rate variability down short term, probably increases it long term.
Say like with exercise, does it increase later on? Have you noticed that if you do hard exercise, it'll decrease in the short term, but you measured it 12 hours later and it increased?
Yeah, exactly. Like my HRV was like 104 this morning.
Oh, wow.
And it was in the pits, because I've been messing around with a little bit with this hypoxic training and the treadmill stuff I'm doing. It was in the pits last night, but you would expect it to be low during or immediately after exercise. But, the fitter I am, which means usually the more exercise I'm doing, the higher the heart rate variability when I take that morning measurement.
And the same with the cold. You notice that maybe even though it decreases, because I actually had an interview with Todd Becker. He mentioned that cold actually increases his heart rate variability, like right away. He measured it while he was in the shower. And so that's interesting that there's a difference of effect.
That's not what I would have expected, unless you're like very relaxed and like laying back in a cold bath or something, and you're very cold stress resilient, right? Like used to doing that. I would expect it to maybe go up a little bit, but yeah, initially that whole like mammalian dive reflex thing from a sharp response to cold should send it plummeting.
But do you notice later on it goes back up even more?
No, I haven't played around with that. I haven't messed around to see if it does go back. That's why I said theoretically, I would expect cold thermo to send it up long term.
So what's the mechanism? The heart rate variability, to my knowledge, is basically controlled by your sympathetic, your HPA axis, how active your stress response is, versus how active your parasympathetic is, and the parasympathetic
Hmm.
is controlled by the vagal nerve. Is there anything else that's
Yeah.
controlling the parasympathetic?
No, the vagal nerve is all that's being measured by the parasympathetic. It's just vagal nerve control of the pacemaker cells, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just measuring SA node activation and the beat-to-beat variability from the interplay between vagus nerve control of heart rate function by the parasympathetic nervous system, and then that HPA axis, sympathetic
Mm-hmm.
nervous system driven activity. And that, I believe, is primarily mediated by an acetylcholine release. So yeah, all you're doing is measuring the strength of those two aspects of the nervous system by measuring the beat-to-beat variability.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Vagal nerve does work by releasing acetylcholine. I'm wondering if you've ever tried taking alpha GPC, let's say, and measuring your heart rate variability to increase
I've
acetylcholine.
taken alpha GPC, but I haven't measured what happens to heart rate variability.
Mm.
It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be curious about that. I'm actually, this is a road that I'm going to be taking. I'm going to measure my heart rate variability and a bunch of factors. And one of the things I'm going to test is alpha GPC, maybe 600
Cool.
milligrams, and see how that works out.
What are you going to use to measure?
That's the thing. That's the reason I didn't buy it right now, because I guess I'm just researching what's the best device, and none of them really got very good reviews on Amazon. So which device do you find is good?
I just use a Bluetooth heart rate monitor that will measure your RR intervals. Some of them do, some of them don't. The Polar H7 will measure RR intervals.
Mm-hmm.
The one I'm using right now is the Timex, just because I race for Timex, so I've got like 3 Bluetooth monitors lying around, and those measure RR intervals. And then I use the NatureBeat app, which is just it measures heart rate recovery,
Is
low
that on
frequency,
Android
high
or
frequency.
iPhone?
iPhone.
Do you have any good apps that you recommend for Android?
Not right now. No, I
Mm.
haven't found any good ones for Android. So let me
Mm.
know if you do. I'm just trying to get NatureBeat made up on Android. So
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at, because it's just trying to get the best device and the best apps, because I want to do it right, get the best measurement,
yeah,
have it convenient, especially if I'm going to be measuring it a lot.
yeah.
Okay, now what's your own regimen like? Like, what's your diet? What percentage do you get from fat? Things like that.
Yeah, sure. I can lay that out. I've got a little bit of time left here, but macronutrient percentages range from day to day based on my levels of physical activity, but generally fall into the range of like 50 to 60% fat, 10 to 30% carbohydrate, depending on the day's given level of activity,
Mm-hmm.
skewing higher towards the carbohydrate on the higher activity days, and primarily timing most of that in a post-workout evening scenario. Right, so I'm taking advantage of insulin sensitivity based on circadian rhythm and activity combined. And then protein, 20 to 30%. Again, slightly higher values, stealing from fat macronutrients on the harder, more intensive days. So that's generally what it looks like. I have experimented with going as high as 80 to 90% fat with very low amounts, like 5 to 10% protein, 5 to 10% carbs for ketosis. But
Mm-hmm.
it's useful for cognitive performance. It's useful for aerobic performance, but it's a very difficult diet to follow long term, to follow socially, and there are some issues with like glycoprotein formation and mucin production from lack of carbohydrates. There are some things that take a hit from like a thyroid standpoint. So that's a tough diet to combine with high levels of physical activity. That ketogenic diet
Would you be on a
versus
ketogenic diet? Yeah. Would you be on a ketogenic diet? Let's say if you weren't working out so hard, like cycling it
um,
maybe, or do you think it's just not practical even to
Yeah,
cycle
I
it?
would be doing what I do right now, cyclic ketogenic. Like I'm totally in ketosis right now, right? And I
Mm.
will be until this evening. And post-workout scenario, I'll have a relatively large bolus of carbs, right? Like 150, 200 grams or so. And
Mm.
I'll be out of ketosis for a good 2 to 4 hours after that. But then I'm back in it by the next day just because I've spent so long in fat adaptation, in ketosis, or doing carb cycling. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, cyclic ketosis I think is far more sustainable.
Are you using a lot of MCTs, or are you consuming a lot of coconut oil? Like, what are you consuming for your
Yeah,
fats?
coconut oil, avocados, olive oil, seeds, nuts, nut butter. But if you look at my diet, it's about 20 to 25 servings of plants per day,
Mm.
extremely plant intensive. with fat sprinkled in here and there, and then small, like 20 to 30 gram portions of protein in the morning, in the afternoon, and the evening. So
Nice. And how much, let's say, water do you drink a day?
I don't know. I just drink when I'm thirsty. I drink a lot of water though.
You
I
drink a
do
lot.
drink a lot of water. Yeah, like when I have those like those glass Pellegrino bottles,
Mm-hmm.
I'll easily drink 5 of those big ones on any given day.
So what is that, like 1.5 to 2 gallons or something?
I think that would come out to like, I believe those are half liters, right? So it'd come out to 2.5 liters plus whatever I drink during exercise. So I'm guessing I'm probably like around 3.5 liters
Nice.
water a
All
day.
right. Yeah. Now, where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. BenGreenfieldFitness.com. That's where I blog. That's where my podcast is. That's honestly the best, easiest place to go, just because it's kind of got everything on there.
All right. And actually, I had one more question. What's your top tips for like getting a good night's rest? Because a lot of people have issues with sleep. Top 3 tips.
Yeah. Top 3 tips. Number 1, don't work for an hour before bed.
All right.
Number 2, sleep in a cool and a very dark room. And I mean very dark, right? Like unplug your alarm clock, any computers, chargers, anything like that.
What if it's
And
what if it's like not emitting blue or green light? You still unplug it?
like what?
Let's say it's like amber. It's not like I have red glasses, so I know whatever's coming, whatever I'm able to see with the red glasses is not blue or green on the blue or green spectrum. So do you
Yeah,
still?
your skin's photoreceptors don't have the glasses on, so those are still getting exposed.
Right, but let's say I'm saying like if it's, let's say it's red light coming from something. So even if your
hmm
skin is exposed to it, is that something that you also block out? You just make it pitch black?
Let's put it this way: when I'm out camping and it's time for bed, I sleep better when the fire's out. Right. So
Mm.
even though most of the research on melatonin disruption has been done on blue light and white light, I still keep my room completely dark, and I don't use like infrared bulbs or red lamps or anything like that once I'm actually asleep. Right. And then the last thing I would say is, experiment with things. There are definite supplements out there. I would say my top 3 for sleep, one would be just for travel, would be melatonin. And then when I'm at home, for an endogenous release of gamma-aminobutyric acid, I like passion flower. And then for just overall nervous system relaxation, either CBD or THC and CBD combined. So
Nice, nice. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. This has been very informative, and I appreciate your time.
cool, man. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Take care. Have a great day.
All right.
Bye
Okay.
bye.
See you later.